The cookies were cooling on the counter, my mother's recipe, the one I'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. Snickerdoodles. Marcus had always loved them. I'd spent the morning rolling them in cinnamon and sugar while our children decorated the tree in the living room, their laughter filling our home like music. That's when I heard it. Not laughter. Something else. A sound I didn't recognize at first, lower, intimate, a woman's breath mixed with Marcus's familiar voice saying words he hadn't said to me in months, "You're beautiful." God, I've missed you. I froze, the tray suspended in my hands. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I moved toward the living room on instinct, my feet knowing before my mind could process. There they were. Marcus, my husband of 16 years, the man who'd held my hand through labor, who'd whispered promises in the dark, stood with his back to me, but I could see her clearly over his shoulder. Victoria Ashford. My former colleague. The woman I'd introduced to our Christmas party 3 months ago. They were kissing. Not a quick kiss. Not a mistake. It was the kind of kiss that speaks of repetition, of a practiced intimacy. His hand was on her back, under her red silk dress, the one I'd actually complimented when she arrived at our door tonight, thinking it was a strange choice for a casual family gathering. His fingers traced her spine like he was reading a language I'd never known. The tray of cookies dropped. The sound of ceramic on hardwood seemed to echo through the entire house. The cookies scattered like broken promises across the floor. Neither of them pulled apart immediately. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, they remained locked together, and then Marcus turned, his face flushed, his expression shifting from shock to something uglier, calculation. "Claire," he said, straightening his shirt. Not an apology. Not an explanation. "Just my name," said the way you'd greet an inconvenient stranger. Victoria smoothed her dress, a thin smile playing at her lips. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Mom?" My daughter's voice came from upstairs. "Is everything okay?" My hands were shaking. I could feel the bite of my fingernails into my palms, a physical anchor to keep me from shattering. The wine glass I'd poured 10 minutes ago sat abandoned on the counter. I'd been steeling myself for a night of forced family togetherness, never imagining how much more courage I'd need. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I called back, my voice steady even as my world tilted. I looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. At the man I'd organized hospital visits for his mother, the man I'd supported through failed business ventures, the man I'd stood beside while he built his career, sacrificing my own in the process. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "We really don't. Not tonight." I walked past them both, stepped over the shattered cookies, and climbed the stairs to my children. That night, after I'd read the children to sleep, after I'd locked myself in the guest bedroom, I allowed myself to cry. Not the dramatic, movie kind of crying. Something deeper, the kind that comes from realizing the man beside you for nearly 2 decades had been slowly poisoning you with lies. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the pieces fall where they would. Because in that moment, every small inconsistency suddenly made sense. The late nights at the office that weren't real, I'd called his company once at 9 p.m., and he wasn't there. The business trip to Denver last month that supposedly kept him from our anniversary dinner. The subtle comments about my body that I'd learned to hide my hurt over. "You look tired, that dress doesn't really suit you anymore, you used to be more fun." 16 years of gaslighting. And I'd been so focused on being a good wife, a good mother, a good woman, that I'd missed the cruelty hidden in plain sight. The irony wasn't lost on me, Victoria was exactly his type now. Younger by 5 years. Child-free. Uncomplicated. Everything I wasn't anymore after bearing 2 children and building a home. At 2 a.m., I made a decision. I sat at the desk with my laptop and a legal pad. I wrote down everything. Every lie. Every inconsistency. Every cruel comment. Every moment I'd felt invisible while his gaze lingered on younger women. Every birthday dinner he'd forgotten. Every promise he'd broken. By 4 a.m., I had 6 pages. But more importantly, I had something else, clarity. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw things or demand explanations or make dramatic declarations. Marcus would expect that. He'd prepare for it, spin it, turn it into a story where I was the hysterical wife and he was the misunderstood victim. Instead, I was going to do something he'd never expect. I was going to win. Marcus tried to act normal over breakfast the next morning. About last night, he began, but I cut him off, my voice pleasant, almost cheerful. The cookies turned out well, don't you think? The kids loved them. He blinked, thrown by my calm. Claire. I'm going to take the kids to Mom's for a few days, I continued, buttering toast with deliberate care. I think we could all use a break from the holiday chaos. That's probably, he started. Good idea. I smiled at him and I saw the relief flash across his face. He thought I was giving him an out. A chance to figure out what he wanted. A few days with Victoria, probably. How convenient. What he didn't know was that I was about to dismantle his entire carefully constructed life. But not today. Not this week. Not even this month. I'd learned something crucial in my restless night: patience was a weapon. My mother lived 2 hours away in a beautiful Victorian house that she'd filled with books and light after my father died. She took one look at my face when I arrived and simply opened her arms. No questions. Not immediately, anyway. That night, with the children asleep upstairs, I told her everything. What are you going to do? She asked, her hand wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes sharp despite her 65 years. I'm going to take my life back, I said. But I need your help. My mother, who'd survived my father's infidelity decades ago, who'd rebuilt herself from nothing, smiled. Tell me what you need. Over the next month, while Marcus believed I was devastated and confused, I became someone else entirely. Someone strategic. Someone intelligent. Someone he'd always underestimated because I'd been too busy being the person he wanted me to be. First, I consulted a divorce attorney. Not to file immediately, but to understand my options. To learn about asset protection, spousal rights, custody arrangements. To understand the law the way a soldier understands terrain. I want everything documented, I told Jennifer Chan, the attorney whose name I'd found through a friend of my mother's. Every asset, every lie, every penny he's hidden. Jennifer, a woman with steel in her eyes and a reputation for courtroom precision, nodded. Then we start with discovery. Do you have access to his financial accounts? I did. Marcus had never bothered to hide his passwords. He'd never thought I'd look. Or perhaps he'd never imagined I'd care enough to question him. I had copies of everything within a week: years of credit card statements, offshore accounts he'd quietly opened, investment portfolios he'd never mentioned. There was nearly $400,000 he'd been quietly stashing away. For Victoria, I assumed. Or maybe just in case he wanted to disappear someday. Second, I reached out to an old friend, Rebecca, a therapist who specialized in narcissistic abuse. Not for sessions, but for understanding. He's not going to change, she told me when I asked her to meet for coffee. And he's not going to acknowledge what he's done. That's not how men like him work. They rewrite the narrative. How do I protect myself? I asked. Evidence, she said. And support. Never let him isolate you. He'll try, but he'll fail if you're not alone. So I did something that terrified me. I started talking. Not to destroy him. Not out of spite. But out of survival. I reconnected with my college friends, women I drifted from during the intense years of building a marriage and raising children. I was honest with them. Not dramatic, just honest. I needed them to understand my life and my circumstances, should questions arise later. They came to my side immediately. Third, I gathered documentation of his infidelity. Not out of spite, but because it would matter in custody arrangements, in property division, in building a case for why my children would be safer, happier, more secure in my primary custody. I was careful. I was legal. I took screenshots. I filed them away. I documented dates and times and contexts. Meanwhile, Marcus grew increasingly frustrated with my calm. 2 months after the Christmas betrayal, Marcus brought Victoria to a family dinner, his mother's birthday, at a restaurant downtown. His mother, Eleanor, had no idea about the affair. His siblings had no idea. He simply introduced Victoria as a friend, and seated her beside him like she belonged at his family table. I watched my mother-in-law's face as she tried to reconcile this beautiful young woman's presence with her son's supposed dedication to his marriage. I watched the confusion bloom in Eleanor's eyes. "How do you two know each other?" Eleanor asked, ever the diplomat. "We work together," Victoria said smoothly. "Marcus is just the best manager." I felt the lie settle into the room like a stone. "Actually," I said, my voice conversational, "Victoria and I met at my company about 3 months ago. She's an amazing consultant. Very creative." Victoria's smile tightened. Marcus's jaw clenched. "How lovely that Marcus has a friend who shares his professional interests," Eleanor said, but I could see the questions forming behind her eyes. "He has lots of friends," I continued pleasantly. "Some he spends more time with than others. Don't you, Marcus?" I smiled at him, and he looked away. Eleanor was no fool. By the end of the dinner, she was watching her son with new eyes. I could see the disappointment forming, the questions she'd be asking him later. 3 weeks after that dinner, Marcus's brother called me. "What's going on with you and Marcus?" he asked without preamble. "Mom's been asking, and frankly, he's been acting strange." "Why don't you ask him?" I said. "I did. He gave me some vague story about work stress. But Mom saw him with that woman, and then you made that comment about how much time he spends with her, and," he trailed off. "Is he having an affair?" I took a breath. "I think you should ask him that question directly." But I'd planted the seed. And seeds grow. Month 4. Marcus was still living in our home, still pretending everything was fine, still convinced I didn't know the extent of his deception. He'd grown careless. Confident. He texted Victoria openly now, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. He took calls in the next room, not bothering with discretion. He thought I was broken. I wasn't broken. I was building. That's when I found the financial transfers. Not the hidden accounts. Not the investment portfolio. This was different. This was money going to a different account, one that had multiple transfers to a luxury apartment in the downtown area. An apartment I discovered through a simple Google search of the address I found on his credit card statements. An apartment where Victoria lived. I took screenshots. I made copies. I organized it chronologically. And then I invited Marcus to the family lawyer's office. "What is this?" he demanded, his face going pale as Jennifer laid out the documents. "You can't." "Actually, I can," Jennifer said calmly. "These are marital assets, obtained from accounts with your wife's name on them. All perfectly legal. And all of it will be accounted for in the divorce proceedings." "Divorce?" Marcus surged out of his chair. "We're not. My client is divorcing you," Jennifer said with the precision of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times. "Grounds: infidelity, financial fraud, and emotional abuse. And she's going for full custody of the children with you paying substantial child support." I watched the color drain from his face. I watched him realize that I'd known. That I'd been planning. That I'd won before he even knew we were playing a game. "This is crazy," he said, turning to me. "You're being hysterical. We can work this out." "We can't," I said simply. "I already have." The next 6 months were hard. They were painful. The divorce proceedings were messy, and there were moments when I questioned my own strength. But I had prepared for those moments. I had my mother. I had my therapist. I had my friends. What I didn't have anymore was fear. Marcus tried every tactic in his arsenal. He attempted to gaslight me about his affair. He painted himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. He tried to minimize his financial crimes as investment mistakes. He even attempted to turn the children against me with gifts and promises and suggestions that I was being unreasonable. It didn't work. Because I had documentation. Because I had witnesses. Because I had my children's trust, which I'd maintained by never badmouthing their father, by letting them form their own conclusions, by being the stable, present parent they could depend on. The judge awarded me primary custody. Marcus got supervised visitation until he completed a parenting program and anger management counseling. The court split the marital assets fairly but awarded me 60% due to his financial deception. He was ordered to pay substantial child support and alimony. Victoria disappeared somewhere in month 3 of the proceedings, having realized that the man she'd been sleeping with was not the successful, devoted husband he'd claimed to be, but rather a narcissist with a history of financial crimes and emotional abuse. Marcus finally understood she'd been his choice, not his love. And now he had nothing. I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Only a quiet sense of justice. 1 year after the Christmas betrayal, I stood in the living room of my new home, a beautiful house I'd purchased with my settlement, in a neighborhood with good schools and good people. The Christmas lights twinkled in my new tree, and my children hung ornaments with the kind of lightness that comes from not living in a home filled with lies. My mother sat on my couch with a cup of tea. My therapist had become a friend. My college girlfriends came by every other week. I'd returned to my career part-time, building something for myself that had nothing to do with anyone else's dreams. And I'd learned something profound in that year: the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something better. I'd dismantled the lie of my marriage, yes. But I'd rebuilt myself into someone stronger. Someone who understood her own worth. Someone who would never again accept cruelty disguised as love. My children thrived. They spent time with Marcus on his supervised visits, but they came home to a mother who was present, engaged, and whole. They watched me rebuild my career. They watched me find joy again. They watched me refuse to apologize for protecting my family. You know what I'm proud of? My mother asked me that Christmas evening, as we watched the lights reflect in the dark window. What? I asked. You didn't become bitter, she said. You became better. I smiled. Because she was right. I hadn't destroyed Marcus. I'd simply refused to let him destroy me. And in doing that, I'd given my children something far more valuable than revenge. I'd given them a mother who knew her own worth. That was the ultimate victory. 3 years later, I received a text from Marcus. Can we talk? I've been in therapy. I think I owe you an apology. I read it twice. Once with the old pain. Once with the new clarity. I didn't respond. Not because I was cruel, but because some conversations are only for people who haven't yet learned to let go. And I had let go. I'd moved forward. I was building a life with a man who valued me, who showed up, who chose me every single day, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent, ordinary kindnesses. That was worth far more than an apology from someone who couldn't understand what he'd done until it was too late. I deleted the message. And I walked outside to meet my daughter for ice cream, my heart light, my future bright. The long game had ended. And I had won the only way that truly mattered, by becoming the author of my own story. I spent 16 years believing my worth was measured by how well I kept the peace, how perfectly I played the role assigned to me. I was invisible in my own home, gaslit into thinking that my pain was my fault. But I learned something in the silence: patience isn't weakness. It's strategy. My quiet planning, my careful documentation, my refusal to shatter, that wasn't acceptance. That was power. I chose not to destroy him. I chose to rebuild myself, and that choice gave me everything he never could. If you've felt erased by someone you trusted, if you've learned to smile through the lies, if you've questioned your own sanity because someone convinced you that you were wrong to see the truth, this story is for you. Silence can be your strength. Your boundaries are not difficult, they are necessary. Your survival, your quiet victory, your decision to walk away and build something better, that makes you extraordinary. You are not weak for leaving. You are powerful for knowing when to let go. Share this story with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. Subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your life, setting boundaries that matter, and turning betrayal into triumph. Because the real revolution doesn't happen in anger. It happens when you decide to write your own ending.